Still taking public transport. My mother taunted across the Thanksgiving table, while my white brother-in-law tossed me his keys, telling me to wash his new Porsche. My father smirked, calling me a disappointment to black excellence. I just checked my watch in silence. Then my phone rang on speaker. Ma'am, your helicopter fleet is grounded due to the storm, so your armored Maybach fleet is pulling up to the driveway now. The blood drained from my mother's face as blinding headlights flooded her dining room. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, and my family had no idea I currently own a $3.9 billion transportation empire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to my channel if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family who underestimated your worth. Walking into my parents' sprawling Atlanta estate, holding a warm homemade sweet potato pie, I knew exactly what awaited me. The scent of roasted turkey and tension hung heavy in the air. I had barely stepped through the grand foyer when my mother, Brenda, intercepted me. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my simple tailored wool coat with absolute disdain. Still taking the city bus, Maya, she scoffed loudly, ensuring her voice carried into the formal dining room. Park that pie by the back door. Bradley just bought a new Porsche, and it is sitting in the main driveway. We do not want you bumping into it with your public transit bags. I tightened my grip on the pie tin, choosing not to react to her bitter words. Inside the dining room, the crystal chandeliers illuminated a picture-perfect family gathering that I was clearly disrupting. My younger sister, Chloe, sat draped in designer silk sipping champagne next to her husband, Bradley. Bradley was a finance bro who wore his privilege like a second skin. As I took my seat at the far end of the table, he leaned back in his chair and casually tossed a heavy set of car keys across the polished wood. The keys slid to a halt right next to my plate. You know, Maya, Bradley said with a lazy, arrogant grin, since you are so used to physical labor, maybe you could go outside and wash the Porsche before dinner. It got a little dusty on the drive over. Consider it earning your keep around here. My father, Marcus, sat at the head of the table carving the turkey. Instead of correcting his son-in-law, he chuckled softly. Bradley is right, Maya, Marcus said, pointing the carving knife in my direction. You are 32 years old and still showing up empty-handed. You are supposed to be a prime example of black excellence representing this family. Instead, you are a burden. It is absolutely pathetic. I looked at the keys, then at my father. I am not washing his car, Dad. I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of the emotion they were trying to provoke. Chloe rolled her eyes, setting her champagne flute down with a sharp clink that echoed in the quiet room. Do not act so high and mighty, Maya. Chloe sneered, gesturing at my outfit. You are wearing a coat that looks like it came from a thrift store. You always play the victim, but you only have yourself to blame. If you had not dropped out of college, you might actually have a real career by now, instead of begging for scraps. The audacity of her statement hung in the air. She conveniently omitted the brutal fact that I had to drop out of my dream university because my parents emptied my college savings account. They took every dime I had earned and saved to pay for Chloe's lavish beauty pageants and her luxury car down payment, leaving me drowning in student loans I could not afford. I was sacrificed so Chloe could shine brightly. But I did not scream. I did not remind them of the theft. I just reached for my glass of water. I sat there in the suffocating atmosphere of my childhood home, letting their insults wash over me. For years I had endured this exact same routine. The constant belittling, the financial guilt trips, the desperate need to appease Bradley simply because he brought a veneer of wealthy white proximity to my parents' social standing. They worshipped his mediocre achievements while systematically tearing down every effort I made. But tonight was different. Tonight I held the power to shatter their entire illusion. Right at that moment, my phone resting beside my plate lit up with an incoming call. My finger intentionally slipped, hitting the speaker button just as I answered the call. A crisp, professional voice echoed clearly through the silent dining room. Good evening, ma'am. This is your chief pilot speaking. I regret to inform you that Apex Chopper 1 is currently grounded due to the severe storm warnings in the local area. However, your armored Maybach fleet has been immediately dispatched to your location and is pulling up to the driveway right now to escort you safely back to headquarters. Bradley choked on his red wine, coughing violently as he scrambled to grab a cloth napkin. Chloe froze completely, her mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. Marcus lowered his heavy carving knife, his eyes darting wildly toward my glowing phone screen. Before anyone at the table could even attempt to process the impossible words, a low, powerful rumble vibrated through the dining room floorboards. Blinding LED headlights cut through the dark storm outside, sweeping aggressively across the sheer curtains and flooding the entire room with a brilliant, piercing white glow. The heavy silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Nobody dared to breathe as the truth of my secret life crashed through the front doors of the only house that ever rejected me. The heavy silence in the dining room hung thick and suffocating. I stood up, the screech of wooden legs against hardwood shattering the quiet. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and tossed it onto the center of the roasted turkey. "Keep the change," I said, my voice steady and cold. "The stuffing is incredibly dry anyway." Without waiting for a response, I turned my back on my gaping family and walked out the front door. My lead security detail, a towering man in a black suit, opened the rear door of the armored Maybach. I slid into the plush leather seat, and the convoy pulled away from the curb, leaving my parents, my sister, and her husband staring blankly through the windows. The next morning, I was standing in my old studio apartment in the city. I only kept the tiny rundown place as a storage unit for early prototype designs. My actual residence was a 10,000-square-foot penthouse overlooking the skyline, but my family had no idea. To them, this cramped box was where their failure of a daughter still lived. I was sorting through a box when a violent pounding rattled the thin wooden door. Before I could reach the handle, the door burst open. My mother Brenda marched inside, flanked by my father Marcus, my sister Chloe, and Bradley. They crowded the small entryway. My mother pointed a trembling finger at my face, her eyes wide with manufactured outrage. "How could you do this to us?" Brenda screamed. "How could you humiliate this family in front of Bradley? We know exactly what you are doing, Maya. You are nothing but a sugar baby. There is no other way a college dropout like you could afford to rent a Maybach. You are selling yourself to put on a fake show and embarrass your own flesh and blood. You are a disgrace to black women everywhere." I stared at her, amazed by the sheer scale of her delusion. Instead of assuming I had achieved something through hard work, her immediate conclusion was that I sold my body. Chloe crossed her arms, looking around the dusty studio with extreme disgust. "Look at this place," Chloe sneered. "You live in a literal dump, Maya. You rented that car just to make my husband feel bad on Thanksgiving. Mom is right. You are dragging our family name through the mud." My father stepped forward to exert his usual patriarchal dominance. "We raised you to have respect," Marcus barked. "You think parading around in cars bought with dirty money makes you superior. You are bringing shame to our doorstep. Bradley comes from a respectable background, and you are forcing him to witness this ghetto behavior. We will not tolerate it." That was when Bradley decided to play his favorite role. The benevolent white savior, gracing the misguided minority with his infinite wisdom. He held up a hand, gesturing for my parents to calm down. He adjusted the cuffs of his tacky blazer and gave me a look of patronizing pity. "Look," Maya Bradley started, his voice dripping with condescension. "We all know things have been hard for you. You do not have an education. You do not have a real career. Going down this dark path is only going to ruin you. But I am a generous guy. My logistics startup is expanding. We just moved into a new commercial space downtown. I can offer you a janitorial position. You can come in after hours, empty the trash, and earn some clean money. It is minimum wage, but it is honest work. It will keep you off the streets and build some character." He crossed his arms, looking pleased with his manufactured generosity. As he shifted his stance, he transferred a thick, glossy folder to his right hand. My eyes locked onto the bold, silver-embossed logo on the front cover. Zephyr Capital. The irony was so potent I could taste it. Zephyr Capital was one of the most ruthless venture capital firms on the East Coast. What Bradley did not know, and what my family could never fathom, was that my holding company quietly acquired a controlling stake in Zephyr Capital 3 months ago. I was the silent chairwoman. The very people Bradley was begging for money answered directly to me. I looked from the pitch deck to Bradley's smug face. My mother was nodding vigorously, urging me to accept this act of charity. Say thank you to your brother-in-law, Brenda demanded. Take the mop and bucket, Maya, and start acting like a respectable adult. I did not scream. I simply smiled. It was a slow, predatory smile that made Chloe step backward. I reached out and smoothly pulled the Zephyr Capital pitch deck right out of Bradley's hands. Hey, Bradley snapped, reaching out to grab it. Do not touch that. That is confidential financial data for a Series B funding round. You would not understand a single word. I flipped the folder open, casually glancing at the inflated revenue projections on the first page. It was amateur hour. A joke of a business model built entirely on hot air. I snapped the folder shut and handed it back to him, maintaining unwavering eye contact. I will see you at your Series B funding pitch tomorrow morning at 9:00 sharp, Bradley. I said, my voice carrying the absolute authority of a woman who held his future in the palm of her hand. Make sure you wear a better tie. That cheap silk blend will look terrible under the boardroom lights. Bradley let out a loud, barking laugh. You are completely and utterly delusional. Maya, he chuckled, turning his back to usher my parents out the front door. Have fun playing pretend in your dirty little studio. We will leave you alone to face your miserable reality while we go back to our perfect lives, he declared, closing the door. Brilliant sunlight hit the towering glass facade of Zephyr Capital headquarters. I stood near the espresso bar sipping black coffee and watching the elevator banks. Right on schedule, the steel doors parted. Bradley strutted out like he owned the building. His overpriced suit could not hide his nervous sweat. My mother Brenda, my father Marcus, and my sister Chloe trailed right behind him like a loyal entourage. Bradley brought them to witness his supposed genius, expecting to secure $50 million for his failing company. Chloe was snapping photos loudly, bragging to her followers about her husband's massive deal. Marcus nodded approvingly, acting as if his presence validated Bradley's unearned white privilege. Brenda adjusted her scarf, looking down at the reception staff. Chloe turned her phone camera toward the espresso bar, and her smile dropped. She lowered her phone, marching across the marble floor. Brenda and Marcus followed her gaze, swerving toward me. Bradley sighed, marching up with his chest puffed out. Maya, what are you doing here? He demanded loudly. I offered you a cleaning job at my warehouse, not here. You cannot follow me to investor meetings begging for handouts. Chloe stepped forward, waving her hand in my face. Did they actually hire you to pour coffee? She sneered. If you are the new barista, fix me a macchiato. Make it quick. Marcus crossed his arms tight with embarrassment. You are making a fool of us again, he hissed. Bradley is securing a deal that will elevate this family. You showing up looking for a handout insults black excellence. Get out before you ruin his concentration. I took a slow sip, letting their insults hang. You seem very confident for a man drowning in debt, Bradley, I replied smoothly. I told you I would be at your pitch. I never break promises. Bradley's face flushed crimson. He looked around wildly, spotting 2 security guards near the desk. Hey, you there? Bradley shouted, snapping his fingers. This woman is trespassing. She followed me here, harassing my family. Remove her immediately before I complain to your boss. The 2 security guards marched over, their expressions unreadable. Brenda smiled triumphantly, watching me get thrown out. You brought this on yourself, Maya, she whispered. You could not stand seeing your sister happy. I watched the guards approach without moving a muscle. Bradley crossed his arms, waiting for my removal. Instead of grabbing me, the lead guard stopped 3 feet away. He placed his hands behind his back and bowed slightly. Good morning, Madam Chairman, the guard said respectfully. The boardroom is fully prepped for your review. Is this man bothering you? Bradley's smug smile vanished instantly. His arms dropped as he stared at the guard in bewilderment. Madam Chairman, Chloe repeated, her voice cracking. What are you talking about? She is a college dropout. She is a janitor. Before anyone could speak, the glass doors of the executive suite swung open. Julian, the CEO of Zephyr Capital, rushed out holding financial reports. He completely ignored Bradley stepping right past my parents to stand directly before me. He looked frantic and incredibly eager to please. "Maya, I am so sorry to keep you waiting," Julian said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The auditors just finished compiling the final risk assessment on the logistics sector, as you requested. We are ready to proceed with your aggressive acquisition strategy whenever you give the word." My parents stood completely frozen in place. Marcus looked like he was struck by a bolt of lightning. Brenda opened her mouth to speak, but absolutely nothing came out. Bradley stumbled backward, bumping heavily into a massive marble pillar. His eyes darted between Julian and me, his brain desperately trying to reject the impossible reality unfolding before him. Julian Bradley stammered, his voice pitching higher in panic. "Julian, there must be some kind of terrible mistake here. This is my sister-in-law, Maya. She takes the public city bus. She does not belong in a place like this. I am here for my Series B funding pitch with you today." Julian turned to look at Bradley as if noticing a stray insect on his pristine floor. "Bradley," Julian said coldly, "I do not make funding decisions around here anymore. Zephyr Capital was acquired completely exactly 3 months ago today. You are not pitching your logistics company to me today. You are pitching to our majority shareholder." Julian gestured respectfully toward the massive oak doors of the main executive boardroom. I did not spare my shocked family another single glance. I walked past their stunned faces, the sharp click of my heels echoing loudly against the marble. The heavy doors of the boardroom closed behind me with a solid thud, separating me from their panicked, breathless whispers. I took my position at the head of the long table, waiting patiently for the incoming show. Exactly 5 minutes later, the boardroom doors opened once again. Bradley walked into the expansive room entirely alone, his breathing shallow and rapid. He clutched his pathetic pitch deck to his chest, his eyes scanning the long mahogany table nervously. Julian stood quietly near the window, but the large, high-backed leather chair at the head of the table was turned entirely away, facing the bright city skyline. Bradley cleared his throat, trying desperately to project a false sense of corporate authority. "Good morning," he began, his voice shaking noticeably. "I am here to present a revolutionary logistics model that will maximize your investment portfolio and generate incredible returns." Julian raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Let me introduce our majority shareholder and chairman," Julian said, gesturing respectfully to the seat. I grabbed the leather armrest and spun the massive chair around very slowly. I locked eyes with a pale, sweating Bradley, leaning forward and clasping my hands together on the table. "Begin your pitch, brother-in-law," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Tell me why I should not bankrupt you today." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Bradley stood frozen at the head of the long mahogany table, clutching his remote clicker like a lifeline. He swallowed hard, the sound unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. Sweat beaded on his forehead, ruining the polished finance bro facade he had carefully cultivated for years. He clicked to his first slide, displaying a colorful graph that pointed sharply upward. "Well, as you can see, our projected revenue for the next fiscal year shows explosive growth." Bradley stammered, his voice lacking its usual arrogant bite. "We have proprietary routing algorithms that will disrupt the entire supply chain industry." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "Stop," I said, cutting him off completely. "Your proprietary algorithm is an off-the-shelf open-source code you bought for $500 and slapped a new user interface on. You do not own a single original patent, Bradley. Your fleet consists of leased trucks you are severely behind on paying for, and your projected revenue is based on contracts that do not actually exist." I watched his face drain of whatever color it had left. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice. I simply dismantled his entire existence using brutal, undeniable logic. "You are burning through cash at an unsustainable rate." I continued, flipping open a folder my analysts had prepared. "Your customer acquisition cost is higher than your customer lifetime value. In simple terms, you are paying people to take your services. Your startup is a sinking ship, masquerading as a luxury yacht." Bradley opened his mouth to argue, but the boardroom doors burst open before he could form a single word. My father, Marcus, stormed into the room with my mother, Brenda, right on his heels. Julian tried to signal security, but I raised my hand, stopping him. "Let them speak," I commanded. My mother marched right up to the edge of the table, her eyes blazing with fury. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "What is wrong with you, Maya?" Brenda demanded loudly. "That is your sister's husband standing up there. He is family. You have all this money hiding in secret while your own flesh and blood struggles. You owe us this funding. You owe him this deal. You are acting like a bitter black woman, trying to tear down a successful man just because you are jealous of your sister's happiness." My father slammed his hand against the back of an empty leather chair. "We raised you to support this family." "Family," Marcus growled. "Bradley represents our future. He elevates our status in this city. You are going to sign that $50 million check right now and ensure your sister maintains her lifestyle. You will not embarrass us by destroying this boy." The sheer audacity of their demands washed over me. They were standing in my building demanding I use my hard-earned wealth to fund the very white man who had mocked me for taking the bus just 24 hours ago. They were weaponizing family loyalty and deploying the black tax to drain my resources for a man who viewed us all as beneath him. I did not react to their screaming. I did not defend my character or my womanhood. Instead, I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick red folder. I tossed it across the smooth surface of the boardroom table. It slid perfectly, stopping right in front of Bradley's shaking hands. "What is that?" Marcus demanded, his voice losing some of its aggressive edge. "That is a forensic accounting report," I said calmly, leaning back in my chair. "You see, while Bradley was busy tossing his keys at me and bragging about buying Chloe a third Porsche, my team was auditing his books. You have been wondering how he affords his country club memberships and those luxury cars. Go ahead and open it, Bradley. Tell my parents where the money really comes from." Bradley stared at the red folder as if it were a venomous snake. He refused to touch it, so I answered for him. "He has zero personal wealth left," I announced, my voice echoing off the glass walls. The money Bradley used to buy Chloe's designer bags and sports cars was embezzled directly from his startup's payroll taxes. He has been defrauding his current investors and stealing from his own employees to fund a fake billionaire lifestyle. He is completely flat broke and legally insolvent. My mother gasped, clutching her chest. Marcus took a step back, shaking his head in denial. "No," my father stammered. "Bradley is a financial genius. He comes from a good family. He would never do something so reckless. He is facing federal prison, Dad," I corrected coldly. "And you brought him into my boardroom expecting me to bail him out with my capital." I looked directly at Bradley, who was shaking with rage. His carefully constructed mask of white corporate superiority shattered into a million pieces. His face turned a dangerous shade of purple, and the veins in his neck bulged. He slammed both of his fists onto the table so hard the water glasses rattled. "You think you are untouchable," Bradley screamed, spit flying from his lips. "You think just because you hid some money and bought a fancy title you can crush me. You are nothing, Maya. You are just a pathetic nobody who got lucky." I watched his tantrum with absolute indifference. "You have no power, Bradley. I own this firm. I own your debts. You are finished." Bradley threw his head back and let out a manic, desperate laugh. "Finished," he mocked. "I am not finished, Maya. I already used your social security number to guarantee a $10 million bridge loan from a private offshore lender." My heart stopped beating. Heavy silence returned to the boardroom. Right on cue, a sharp chime echoed loudly. My phone lit up with a debt alert. I stared down at the glowing screen of my phone. A $10 million liability had just been flagged on my personal credit report. Bradley stood at the end of the boardroom, panting like a cornered animal, a twisted smile of triumph breaking across his sweating face. He actually thought he had checkmated me. He believed tying my name to his fraudulent offshore loan would force me to open my vault and save him. He weaponized my financial stability, assuming I would gladly pay his debts to avoid a blemish on my flawless financial record. I did not scream. I did not demand he call the bank to reverse the transaction. I simply locked my phone, dropped it back into my leather briefcase, and stood up. I straightened my tailored blazer, looked my father dead in the eye, and walked right out of my own boardroom. Let them sweat in their arrogant delusions. I had much bigger plans for his absolute punishment. I refused to play their petty games. They assumed I was just a scapegoat, conditioned to absorb their financial burdens without asking questions. I walked out to my waiting car, mentally drafting the legal contracts needed to execute my retaliation. Fast forward exactly 2 weeks later. It was the night of my parents' 35th wedding anniversary gala. They had rented out the grand ballroom of the most exclusive luxury hotel in Atlanta for the extravagant celebration. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm golden light over towering ice sculptures and round tables draped in imported silk. The entire black elite of the city was in attendance tonight. Politicians, judges, and high-profile business owners mingled, holding flutes of vintage champagne. I arrived wearing a custom-tailored ivory gown, standing quietly near the back of the room to observe the performance. My mother, Brenda, marched right up to the center stage, craving the spotlight. She tapped the microphone, demanding the undivided attention of the glittering crowd. "Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us." Brenda beamed, her voice echoing off the gilded walls. "We are so incredibly blessed. I want to take a special moment to thank my wonderful son-in-law, Bradley." Brenda gestured broadly toward the front table, where Bradley sat grinning like a smug king. This spectacular $100,000 gala was funded entirely by his extreme generosity. I is a shining example of what a successful provider looks like. Please raise your glasses to Bradley. The crowd politely applauded. It was a complete lie. I knew for a fact that the high-end catering, the premium venue, and the ridiculous ice sculptures were paid for using the last remaining funds from my childhood savings account. But Brenda would rather die than admit she stole from her black daughter to make her white son-in-law look like a financial savior. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, keeping my expression entirely neutral. Suddenly, a sharp elbow jabbed hard into my ribs. My sister Chloe stumbled forward, intentionally pretending to lose her balance. A full glass of dark red Cabernet splashed violently across the front of my pristine ivory gown. The dark stain spread, instantly ruining the expensive fabric beyond repair. "Oops," Chloe said, her voice loud enough to draw stares from nearby guests, but her eyes were completely dead and malicious. "I am so clumsy today. You have plenty of money to buy a new dress, right, Maya?" She leaned in close, pressing her face right next to my ear, so only I could hear her venomous whisper. "Pay off my husband's $10 million debt tonight, or we will default on purpose and ruin your perfect credit score forever. You are going to be our personal piggy bank. We own you, Maya." I stood there perfectly still, letting her words hang in the air between us. She actually believed her petty threats held weight. She thought a stained dress and a stolen identity were enough to bring a billionaire to her knees in fear. I looked down at the ruined silk of my gown. I did not flinch. I did not gasp or cause a scene. I calmly pulled a white linen handkerchief from the passing waiter's silver tray and dabbed at the wet stain with practiced grace. "You should really watch your step, Chloe," I replied, my voice barely a whisper, but laced with pure ice. "Falling from such a high pedestal is going to break your neck." I raised my right hand and caught the eye of my lead executive assistant, standing discreetly near the ballroom entrance. I gave him a single sharp nod. He tapped his earpiece and gave me a thumbs up in return. Chloe frowned, stepping back in confusion. "What did you just do?" she demanded, her fake smile slipping rapidly. "I just closed a major corporate acquisition," I answered smoothly, smoothing down my ruined dress. "You see, Chloe Bradley thought he was a genius by using my social security number to secure that $10 million bridge loan from a private offshore lending firm. He thought backing me into a corner would force me to wire him the cash to pay it off and save my own credit score. He severely underestimated how much liquid capital I actually have at my disposal." I took a deliberate step closer, backing my terrified sister against a cold marble pillar. "I did not pay off his loan, Chloe. I bought the entire private lending firm. I acquired their complete portfolio of debt this morning, which means I personally own 100% of your husband's financial liabilities. I am his sole creditor, and I just called the massive debt due in full." Chloe's jaw dropped open. The color drained from her perfectly contoured face, leaving her looking pale and terrified as the reality of my words sank in. On the main stage, Bradley was standing up, raising his crystal glass high into the air to toast his own fabricated wealth and success. To family and fortune, Bradley announced loudly, basking in the applause of my parents' elite friends. Before anyone could clink their glasses together, a deafening mechanical siren blared from the street right outside the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows. The heavy pulsating sound cut through the classical music and the polite chatter like a chainsaw. The heavy glass doors leading to the valet balcony shuddered violently. Three massive heavy-duty tow trucks completely ignored the red velvet ropes and smashed directly through the hotel valet barricades. The yellow strobe lights attached to the roofs of the tow trucks flashed aggressively, painting the grand ballroom in a harsh warning glow. The elite guests lowered their champagne flutes in shock, murmuring in absolute confusion as the ruthless reality of Bradley's financial ruin arrived loudly at the front doors. The glittering crowd of politicians and socialites surged toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows and spilled out onto the grand marble balconies. I stood entirely still, watching the perfectly choreographed destruction of my family-fabricated empire unfold in real time. Down in the valet, round about the three heavy-duty tow trucks, through the luxury hotel entrance into complete chaos. The flashing yellow strobe lights reflected off the polished hoods of Chloe's three prized luxury vehicles: a pearl white Porsche, an imported Range Rover, and a custom Mercedes convertible. The repo men did not care about the valet attendants or the screaming hotel manager. They moved with brutal efficiency, strapping thick metal chains to the axles of the vehicles Bradley had fraudulently purchased. Chloe shoved her way through the crowd of elite guests, her expensive heels snapping against the marble floor. She pressed her hands against the cold glass of the window, her eyes wide with unadulterated panic. "No!" she shrieked, her voice cracking hysterically. "What are they doing? Stop them, Bradley! Tell them to stop!" Bradley was completely paralyzed. He stood frozen next to the overturned ice sculpture, his face the color of wet ash. I knew exactly what was happening, and he knew he was powerless to stop it. Unable to accept her public humiliation, Chloe sprinted out the ballroom doors and down the grand staircase. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the golden child of the family abandoned all her refined upper-class grace. She burst through the valet doors and physically launched herself at the nearest repo man. She grabbed his reflective vest, clawing at his chest and screaming at him to unhook her Porsche. The repo man simply stepped back, letting her stumble onto the concrete driveway. "Ma'am, if you touch me again, I am calling the police," the driver warned loudly, ensuring the entire balcony of onlookers heard him. "These vehicles are property of Apex Financial Holdings due to extreme default. Step away from the repossessed assets." Up in the ballroom, the whispers of the elite crowd grew into a deafening roar. Whispers of bankruptcy and fraud echoed around my parents. The pristine social reputation my mother Brenda had spent decades building was disintegrating right before her eyes. She could not handle the burning shame of her peers watching her golden child completely unravel in the driveway. Needing a scapegoat, Brenda spun around and locked her furious gaze on me. She marched across the ballroom floor, her hands clenched into tight fists. Before my security detail could intercept her, Brenda raised her hand and struck me across the face with a vicious, open-handed slap. The sharp crack echoed over the ballroom music, silencing the nearest guests. My head snapped to the side from the sheer force of the blow. The sting radiated across my cheek, but I refused to break my posture. "You jealous monster!" Brenda screamed, her voice dripping with venom and desperation. "You did this! You could not stand to see your sister happy. You could not secure a wealthy man of your own, so you decided to destroy your sister's family out of pure spite. You are a bitter, lonely woman, Maya. We gave you everything, and you bring this ghetto behavior into a room full of respectable people to ruin our anniversary." My father, Marcus, quickly stepped up right beside her, puffing out his chest to intimidate me. "You have crossed the line," Maya Marcus growled aggressively. "You think buying some debt makes you God. You are going to call those trucks off right now. Bradley is a good provider who made a minor accounting error. You do not destroy black excellence to satisfy your own miserable ego." I slowly turned my head back to face them. I did not rub my burning cheek. I did not shed a single tear. Their desperate reliance on patriarchal standards to excuse Bradley's criminal behavior was exactly what I expected. They were fully prepared to sacrifice my financial security to protect a white man who viewed them as nothing more than a convenient bank account. "You want to talk about a good provider?" I asked, my voice projecting clearly across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "You want to talk about destroying a family, Brenda? Let us take a close look at exactly what your precious son-in-law has been providing." I did not wait for her response. I simply raised my hand and snapped my fingers once. My lead executive assistant standing by the sound booth immediately executed the command. The classical music playing through the ballroom speakers abruptly cut off. Above the main stage, a massive mechanical hum resonated as the hotel's 50-foot cinematic projector screen slowly descended from the ceiling. Bradley finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. He looked up at the descending screen and sheer animal terror washed over his face. "Turn that off!" Bradley yelled, rushing toward the stage and waving his arms frantically. "Turn it off right now! Maya, you cannot do this. We are family." It was far too late. The high-definition projector flickered to life, casting a brilliant glow over the horrified crowd. I did not project the boring forensic accounting documents or the forged loan agreements. I knew exactly what type of visual evidence would completely shatter Chloe and my parents. The massive screen illuminated with crisp, colorful security footage from the lobby of a notoriously expensive luxury condominium complex downtown. The timestamp on the footage was from just 3 days ago. There on the 50-foot screen stood Bradley. He was not attending a late-night logistics meeting like he had told his wife. He was wrapping his arms tightly around a young blonde white woman, pulling her in for an intimate kiss right in front of the concierge desk. The crowd gasped in unison, but the ultimate betrayal was in his hands. Bradley was holding 3 massive shopping bags featuring the iconic Chanel logo. "Those bags," I announced, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity, "were purchased using the exact same stolen payroll funds that he used to finance Chloe's cars. He has been draining his own company and defrauding your family to finance his mistress." Down in the driveway, Chloe had just been escorted back up the stairs by the hotel staff. She walked through the ballroom doors just in time to see her husband kissing his mistress on the 50-foot screen. The Chanel bags dangled in his hands, mocking her existence. The reality of her entire life being a stolen, fabricated lie hit her all at once. Her legs gave out completely. Chloe collapsed screaming onto the polished ballroom floor right in front of the entire glittering crowd. The screaming tore through the grand ballroom, cutting over the sudden silence of the elite crowd. Chloe thrashed against the cold marble floor, her designer gown bunching up around her knees as she wailed in absolute agony. The 50-foot screen above us remained frozen on the image of her white husband kissing his blonde mistress while holding bags bought with stolen money. The high society guests, who had been sipping champagne just moments ago, were now raising their glowing smartphones, capturing every second of my family's spectacular public downfall. Brenda dropped to her knees, frantically trying to shield Chloe's sobbing face from the flashing cameras. Bradley stood completely paralyzed on the stage, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked down at his wife writhing on the floor, but he did not move a single muscle to comfort her. Instead, he looked to my father for salvation. Marcus did not disappoint him. My father marched right past his devastated daughter on the floor and stomped directly toward me. His face was a mask of pure patriarchal fury. He grabbed my upper arm, his grip bruising and tight. "Men make mistakes!" Maya, Marcus hissed, his voice vibrating with rage. "You do not destroy a family business over a woman. You do not humiliate this family in front of the entire city. We are taking this off the floor right now." He yanked my arm, pulling me violently toward the heavy oak doors that led to the private VIP corridors behind the main stage. Bradley quickly scurried down the stage steps and followed us, desperate to escape the blinding glare of 100 smartphone cameras. I did not fight my father's grip. I walked willingly into the secluded hallway because I knew exactly what was waiting in the dark. The heavy acoustic doors swung shut behind us, instantly cutting off the hysterical wails of my sister and the loud murmurs of the elite crowd. The VIP corridor was dimly lit and dead silent. As soon as the doors closed, Bradley's paralyzing fear vanished completely, replaced by his usual arrogant white privilege. He adjusted his suit jacket and glared at me with absolute hatred. "You think playing a video changes anything?" Maya Bradley spat, taking an aggressive step toward me. "You think exposing my personal life invalidates that $10 million loan? You are still on the hook for that money. I will drag your pristine company through years of litigation until your board of directors forces you to step down." Marcus stepped between us, but he did not defend me. He pointed a rigid finger right at my face. "You are completely out of control," Marcus snarled. "You have lost your mind. In fact, that is exactly what we are going to tell the public. We are going to call our lawyers tonight and file an emergency injunction to have you declared mentally incompetent. You are clearly having a psychotic break." I leaned against the silk wallpaper, crossing my arms over my ruined ivory gown. "A conservatorship?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm. "You plan to lock me in a psychiatric ward to steal my $3.9 billion empire. It is not stealing if it belongs to the family," Marcus shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "I am your father. I gave you life, Maya. I put the roof over your head when you were a child. Every single dollar you make belongs to me. You owe me your existence. I signed that $10 million loan as your legal proxy, and it is perfectly legal because I am the head of this family. You are a bitter, ungrateful black woman who needs to be put back in her place." He actually believed it. The toxic entitlement ran so deep in his veins that he genuinely thought giving me basic childhood necessities gave him the legal and moral right to commit massive corporate fraud. He stood there puffing his chest out, fully expecting me to cower, submit, and open my checkbook to save his precious white son-in-law. I uncrossed my arms and took a slow, deliberate step toward the two men. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply raised my right hand and gently tapped the heavy diamond pendant, resting perfectly against my collarbone. "This custom necklace was a gift to myself for closing my first billion-dollar acquisition," I said softly, my voice echoing off the narrow corridor walls. "But it is not just jewelry. It is a military-grade audio transmitter." Bradley's smug expression faltered. Marcus lowered his pointing finger, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "A transmitter," Marcus echoed, his voice losing its aggressive edge. "Yes, a transmitter." I smiled, a slow, cold smile that finally made Bradley take a terrified step backward. "And it is currently broadcasting on a live encrypted channel directly to the federal authorities." "Which means, Marcus, you just confessed to federal wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit medical fraud on a recorded government line." The blood drained completely from Bradley's face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He spun around, grabbing the brass handle of the corridor door, desperate to run. He never got the chance to turn the knob. A deafening crash shook the entire foundation of the hallway as the heavy oak doors at both ends of the corridor were violently kicked open simultaneously. The wood splintered against the wall. A dozen armed federal agents wearing heavy tactical vests, with FBI emblazoned in bold yellow letters, swarmed the narrow space. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, bypassing the luxury and glamour of the hotel to execute their mission. "Nobody move," a commanding voice shouted over the chaos. "Keep your hands where we can see them right now." Bradley let out a pathetic whimper, throwing his hands into the air and dropping to his knees on the plush carpet. Two heavily armed agents slammed him face first into the wall, pinning his arms behind his back. Marcus froze completely, his arrogant patriarchal dominance evaporating instantly as a federal agent shoved him against the opposite wall. Bradley Vance and Marcus Hayes, the lead agent, announced, his voice booming through the corridor as he pulled a folded document from his tactical vest. "We have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." The sharp, heavy click of steel handcuffs snapping shut around Bradley's wrists echoed sharply in the narrow hallway, sealing his absolute destruction. But wealth and privilege always find a loophole in the justice system. Within 48 hours, Bradley and Marcus were out on bail. Bradley's wealthy parents, despite their initial disgust, quietly wired the exorbitant bail money to keep their son out of a federal holding cell pending trial. Marcus leveraged the last remaining equity in his house to match it. Now facing decades in federal prison, they realized legal maneuvering would not save them from the overwhelming evidence. They needed the court of public opinion on their side. They needed a distraction so massive and racially charged that the federal prosecutor would hesitate to bring the hammer down. They deployed Brenda and Chloe to execute a vicious smear campaign against me, to destroy my reputation, and force me into a deeply humiliating and entirely public surrender. They believed that manipulating the media narrative would somehow shield them from federal prosecution and public disgrace. 3 days later, my face was plastered across every major urban media outlet. Brenda and Chloe secured an exclusive live interview on a massively popular podcast dedicated to Black culture and social justice. I sat in my penthouse watching the live stream on my large monitor. Brenda was dressed in modest earth tones, crying flawlessly without ruining her makeup. Chloe sat beside her, holding her hand and looking like a traumatized victim of extreme corporate bullying. They spun a masterful web of dangerous lies. This malicious strategy was designed to completely obliterate my business and credibility. Maya turned her back on her own people. Brenda sobbed heavily into the studio microphone. We sacrificed everything to raise her with strong Black values, and the second she got a taste of billion-dollar wealth, she completely forgot where she came from. The podcast host leaned forward, eating up every single word of the fabricated drama. So you are saying she targeted her own family? The host asked, his tone dripping with shock. Chloe nodded, wiping away a fake tear. She threw our Black father out onto the street and had him arrested just to protect white corporate interests. Chloe whimpered. She chose her white brother-in-law's money over her own blood. She is a soulless billionaire who hates her own community and will destroy anyone for a profit. The live chat scrolling next to the video exploded with absolute vitriol. Thousands of viewers were calling for my immediate cancellation. They called me a sellout, a traitor, and a corporate puppet who hated her own skin. The viral clip spread like wildfire across every single social media platform. Within hours, the public backlash hit Apex Transit hard. Our stock price dipped by 4%. My secure phone lines lit up with panicked calls from my board of directors. I walked into an emergency virtual board meeting later that afternoon, facing a grid of highly anxious executives. Maya, we have a massive racial public relations nightmare on our hands, the lead board member said, sweating visibly in his expensive suit. The urban demographic is a huge sector of our ridership. They are threatening widespread boycotts. We need you to step down as CEO temporarily or issue a massive public apology to your parents to kill this terrible narrative. I stared at the grid of panicked faces, completely unfazed by the digital mob calling for my head. I will do absolutely no such thing, I replied, my voice sharp and unyielding. You want me to apologize to actual criminals to save face on the internet? I do not negotiate with terrorists, and I certainly do not bend the knee to my abusive relatives. The board member sighed, running a shaking hand through his hair. If you do not fix this crisis by tonight, the shareholders will force a vote of no confidence. We cannot have a CEO accused of destroying a Black family to protect white assets at all. I closed my laptop, severing the connection instantly. I did not need public relations experts or highly paid corporate spin doctors. I needed to cut the head off the snake directly on a live broadcast. I ordered my elite security team to prep the Maybach immediately. We drove straight through heavy city traffic to the downtown studio where the podcast was still broadcasting live to millions of listeners. The private security at the studio entrance tried to stop my detail, but my lead guard simply flashed his federal clearance badge, forcing them to step aside quickly. I walked down the neon-lit hallway, hearing my mother's tearful voice echoing loudly from the broadcast room. She was deep into a lengthy monologue about how much she sacrificed for my ungrateful soul. She claimed she worked her fingers to the bone to ensure I had food on the table while I selfishly hoarded my billions. I did not bother knocking on the door. I kicked the heavy soundproof door wide open. The loud, heavy thud made the podcast host jump entirely out of his seat. Brenda froze mid-sob, her mouth hanging wide open in pure terror. Chloe gasped, shrinking back into her leather chair. The studio cameras were still rolling, broadcasting my sudden entrance to millions of live viewers. I walked right past the stunned production crew and marched directly up to the host's main desk. I slammed a thick, heavy manila envelope down onto the polished wood right in front of the broadcasting microphones. "You want to talk about community and sacrifice, Mother?" I asked, my voice projecting loud and clear over the live audio feed. "You want to talk about how you worked your fingers to the bone for my well-being?" I leaned over the desk, staring straight into the camera lens, then shifted my cold gaze to Brenda's terrified face. "Let us talk about the $500,000 settlement check." Brenda lunged across the desk, clawing at the microphones. "Cut the feed," she screamed. She tried to swipe the thick manila envelope from the wood, but my hand clamped down on her wrist. The podcast host, who knew absolute viral gold when he saw it, shoved his chair backward and signaled his crew. "Keep the cameras rolling," the host commanded, his eyes fixed on the envelope. "We are live to 3 million people, and the lady wants to speak." Chloe was shaking violently, pressing her back against the padded leather. I released my mother's wrist as the red recording lights glowed brighter than ever. I unclasped the envelope and pulled out a stack of certified banking documents. I held the first page up directly to the main camera, ensuring the high-definition lens captured every printed detail. When I was 12 years old, I was involved in a severe bus accident that left me hospitalized for 3 months. I announced, my voice carrying steady and cold across the live feed. The City Transit Authority issued a $500,000 medical settlement meant to cover my physical therapy and future educational needs. The money was placed in a custodial account managed by my parents, Marcus and Brenda. I tossed the bank statements onto the host's desk, spreading them out in a fan of financial betrayal. "Go ahead and read the withdrawal history," I told the host. "Read it loud enough for the community to hear." The host grabbed the papers, his eyes scanning the highlighted rows. "Withdrawals for $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. He read aloud, his tone shifting from shock to absolute disgust. "Payments made to Elite, childhood beauty pageant circuits, custom dress designers, and luxury car dealerships." He looked up at my mother, who was visibly shrinking under the studio lights. "You drained a disabled child's medical fund to buy tiaras and sports cars." I pointed a rigid finger at Chloe, who was now sobbing real tears of utter humiliation. "They drained my future to fund her vanity," I stated bluntly. "And when the pageant money ran out, they took the last remaining $100,000 and handed it directly to Bradley. They took a black child's medical settlement and gifted it to a privileged white man as seed money for his fraudulent logistics company. They literally stole from their own blood to buy proximity to whiteness." Brenda shook her head wildly, tears streaming down her face. "We were investing in the family," she cried desperately to the cameras. "We knew Bradley would multiply the money and take care of us all." "You sold me out for a man who hates you," I shot back. "You claim you raised me with strong black values, but you bowed down to a man who mocks our very existence." The podcast host leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "That is a heavy accusation, Maya. Can you prove he feels that way?" I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket and seamlessly paired it to the studio's main Bluetooth audio receiver. I pressed play on the crystal-clear audio file I had saved from Thanksgiving dinner. The entire studio fell dead silent as Bradley's arrogant voice blasted through the state-of-the-art speakers. "Since you are so used to physical labor, maybe you could go outside and wash the Porsche." Bradley sneered through the speakers. "Consider it earning your keep around here." Then my father's voice joined in, chuckling softly and agreeing that I was a burden to black excellence, while Bradley called my behavior ghetto and pathetic. The audio captured every disgusting racist microaggression Bradley had casually thrown at me, and worst of all, it captured Brenda and Marcus laughing along with him, eager to please their white savior, while offering up their own daughter as the sacrificial lamb. The live chat on the monitors behind the host exploded into a chaotic blur of text. Millions of viewers were flooding the servers with absolute outrage. The community that Brenda had tried to weaponize against me was now turning on her like a pack of starving wolves. They called her a traitor, a disgrace, and a pathetic enabler who sold her soul for a fake luxury lifestyle. Chloe covered her ears, sobbing uncontrollably as the truth of her husband's racism and her parents' complicity was broadcast to the entire nation. "You lied to the world, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You sat on this stage and called me a soulless billionaire, but you are the ones who sold your souls decades ago. You chose a racist fraud over your own daughter, and now the entire world knows exactly what you are. Before Brenda could even attempt to formulate a pathetic defense, the heavy studio doors opened one final time. A tall, sharp-suited man, holding two thick leather briefcases, stepped confidently into the brightly lit room. It was my lead corporate attorney. He walked directly onto the live set, ignoring the cameras completely. He stopped in front of Brenda and Chloe, who were both trembling uncontrollably under the blinding studio lights. He handed each of them a heavy, dense legal folder. "What is this?" Brenda choked out, staring at the documents like they were radioactive. "You are being officially served," my lawyer stated clearly, his voice projecting perfectly into the podcast microphones. "On behalf of Apex Transit and my client Maya, we are filing a $50 million lawsuit against you, Marcus and Chloe, for federal defamation, criminal fraud, and the prolonged embezzlement of a minor." The host let out a loud, stunned gasp, leaning back in his chair as the live viewership counter skyrocketed past 4 million. Brenda dropped the folder, her knees buckling as she collapsed onto the studio floor. Chloe buried her face in her hands, wailing, as the reality of her destruction finally settled in. I adjusted my blazer and walked out, leaving them ruined. I stepped out of the podcast studio and immediately into the back of my waiting Maybach. The heavy armored door closed, blocking out the frantic shouts of the paparazzi who had already gathered on the sidewalk. My phone screen was a blur of incoming notifications, but one urgent priority message cut through the noise. It was from my chief operating officer. He warned me that an emergency board meeting had been convened behind my back at Apex Transit headquarters. Bradley's wealthy parents, the Vance family, were furious about their son's public federal arrest and the destruction of their prestigious name. In retaliation, they reached out to their old money network and quietly bought off a rogue faction of my own board of directors. They were staging a corporate coup while I was busy dismantling my mother on live television. I tapped the glass partition and instructed my driver to head straight to the Apex Tower. I did not feel a single ounce of panic. I felt the cold, calculating thrill of a predator watching its prey walk directly into a trap. The city streets blurred past my window as I mentally prepared for the boardroom bloodbath that was about to take place. I had spent years building this empire from nothing, and I was absolutely not going to let a group of entitled rich men steal it from me to protect a racist fraud like Bradley. The ride to the financial district took less than 15 minutes. I strode through the towering glass atrium of my headquarters, ignoring the hushed whispers of the corporate staff who had just watched my viral broadcast on their monitors. I took the private executive elevator directly to the top floor. When I pushed open the double doors of the main boardroom, the tension inside was thick enough to cut with a knife. 5 senior board members sat around the custom marble table. They were men who had always smiled in my face, while secretly resenting the fact that a young black woman held absolute power over their massive investment portfolios. At the head of the faction sat Sterling, a silver-haired venture capitalist who had deep ties to Bradley's family and a history of hostile corporate takeovers. Sterling stood up as I entered, buttoning his expensive suit jacket with a look of manufactured pity. "Maya," he began, his voice dripping with false concern, "we were just about to call you. We all watched that disastrous podcast appearance. This public family feud of yours has become a massive liability. The stock is taking a hit, and our institutional investors are calling us in a panic. You are dragging the Apex brand into a ghetto reality show, and we simply cannot allow it." I walked slowly to my chair at the head of the table, but I did not sit down. I rested my hands on the cool marble, staring Sterling dead in the eye. "You convened an emergency board meeting without notifying the chief executive officer," I said, my voice perfectly level. "That is a direct violation of our corporate bylaws, Sterling." Another board member chimed in, nervously adjusting his tie. "The bylaws also include a strict morality clause, Maya. As the face of this company, your actions must not bring public disgrace or racial controversy to our doorstep. Having your own father arrested by the FBI and suing your mother for $50 million on a live urban podcast violates that clause. The Vance family has assured us that if we remove you, they will inject a massive stabilization fund to correct the stock dip." We are exercising our fiduciary duty to protect the shareholders. I looked around the room, analyzing their greedy, desperate faces. They actually thought they had outsmarted me. They believed the Vance family's old money could easily steamroll my authority. They looked at me and saw a woman distracted by family drama, assuming I had taken my eyes off the corporate chessboard. I pulled out my chair and sat down, crossing my legs elegantly. "Well," I said, gesturing with an open hand toward Sterling, "if you believe you have the legal standing and the votes to remove me from the company I built from the ground up, then, by all means, proceed with the vote." Sterling smirked, clearly thrilled that I was not putting up a screaming fight. He thought my compliance was the sign of absolute defeat. He assumed I was just a tired, emotional woman who had run out of energy to fight his superior corporate strategy. He immediately called the motion to a formal vote. I watched in absolute silence as all 5 men raised their hands high into the air, signaling their unanimous decision to terminate my position as Chief Executive Officer and strip me of my operational power. "The motion passes," Sterling announced proudly, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "Maya, you are officially relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Security will escort you to your office so you can pack your personal belongings. We will be drafting a press release to distance Apex Transit from your family scandal." I did not blink. I did not shed a tear or beg for my job. I simply reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out my tablet, and tapped a single digital button on the screen. A heavy mechanical locking sound echoed loudly through the room. The thick glass doors of the boardroom sealed shut tight, and the transparent smart glass instantly frosted over, turning completely opaque. The electronic lock glowed a solid, undeniable red. Sterling frowned, stepping toward the door and pulling hard on the handle. It did not budge an inch. "What is the meaning of this?" Maya, Sterling demanded, his voice rising in panic. "Open these doors right now. You are no longer in charge here." I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers together. "Actually, Sterling, I am the only one in charge here," I replied smoothly. "You see, when I took this company public, I knew men exactly like you would eventually try to use your old boys club connections to steal my life's work. I knew Bradley's family would try to leverage their wealth against me the second I put their criminal son in handcuffs. So I triggered a poison pill in the company bylaws exactly 6 months ago." The board members exchanged terrified glances, rushing back to the table. "A poison pill," one of them stammered. "What did you do?" I smiled, letting them drown in their own sudden terror. "I do not just own 51% of the voting shares," I explained, my voice echoing. "I personally own the intellectual property for our entire autonomous fleet. The routing algorithms, the vehicle software, the AI navigation patents, everything that makes Apex Transit functional is legally owned by a private shell company that is registered solely in my name. Apex Transit simply licenses that technology from me on a daily basis." Sterling turned pale as a ghost, his knees buckling slightly as the devastating reality crashed down on him. The other board members began frantically checking their phones, trying to verify my claims, but the internal server access had already been restricted by my security protocols. They were entirely locked out of the system. And the best part about that licensing agreement, I continued, standing up and towering over his trembling frame, is that it contains a key man clause. If I am removed as Chief Executive Officer without my explicit written consent, the license terminates instantly and permanently. The fleet goes completely dark. You just voted to fire me, gentlemen. Fire me and this company's valuation hits zero in 3 seconds. Sterling stared at me, his jaw practically unhinged. The sheer panic in his eyes was intoxicating. The other 4 board members scrambled out of their leather chairs, tripping over their own expensive shoes, in a desperate attempt to backtrack. "Maya, please listen to reason," one of them begged, holding his hands up in surrender. "We were misled by the Vance family. They assured us this was a simple transition. We had no idea you held the intellectual property licenses personally. We can reverse the vote right now. Let us just tear up the minutes and pretend this meeting never happened. You chose to protect a racist embezzler over the black woman who built the very chairs you are sitting in. You are all officially terminated, effective immediately." I tapped my tablet again. The glass doors unsealed and slid open. My private security detail was already waiting in the outer hallway. Escort these former board members out of the building, I commanded. I walked out of the apex tower, leaving the sputtering executives behind me. The cool evening air felt refreshing as I slid into the back of my armored Maybach. The Maybach pulled into the secure underground garage of my residential high-rise. I took the private elevator designated exclusively for the penthouse level. When the chrome doors parted, opening directly into my private foyer, I was not met with silence. Marcus, Brenda, and Chloe were standing right in the middle of my marble entryway. Beside them stood an older white man wearing a cheap tweed suit and clutching a thick medical clipboard. My father took a bold step forward, his chest puffed out with that same toxic patriarchal arrogance. "You thought you could just lock us out?" Maya Marcus growled loudly. "You thought cutting off our accounts would stop me from protecting my family. You are completely out of your mind. We are taking control of your estate tonight." Brenda pulled a crumpled tissue from her purse, dabbing at her completely dry eyes. "We brought help for you, Maya," she said, using her most manipulative, sickeningly sweet maternal voice. "You are clearly suffering from a severe manic episode. The stress of your job has broken your brain. You threw your own brother-in-law in jail and ruined your parents' anniversary. Only a sick, crazy person would attack her own black family like that. We are doing this because we love you." "The Vance family is furious, but they know how to handle situations like this," Chloe bragged. "They provided the funding to get you the medical attention you so clearly need. Once you are locked away getting treatment, I will make sure your company is run properly." "I am Dr. Eris," the man began. "Given your recent erratic behavior and the severe distress you have caused your family, I am initiating a 5150 involuntary psychiatric hold. You are a danger to yourself and others. Your father is filing the emergency paperwork to establish a full medical and financial conservatorship over your estate. You are going to come with us quietly to a private facility, or I will have the authorities forcefully sedate you." They relied on the historical weaponization of the medical system against black women, assuming no one would question a white doctor declaring a powerful black woman insane. They wanted to lock me in a padded room and drain my multi-billion-dollar empire dry to pay off Bradley's criminal restitution. I simply smiled, a cold, sharp smile that caused the fake doctor's confident posture to falter. "You are incredibly predictable, Marcus," I said, crossing my arms. "Did you really think a woman who anticipated a hostile corporate board takeover would leave her own front door unguarded?" I snapped my fingers. The secondary service elevator behind them chimed loudly. The heavy doors slid open and my personal security team poured into the foyer. They instantly fanned out, forming a solid, impenetrable wall between my family and the exit. Chloe let out a terrified yelp, backing into a marble console table. Marcus clenched his fists, realizing he was completely trapped. But the security team was not the main event. I gestured toward the last man stepping out of the service elevator. He wore a sharp navy suit and carried a sleek metal briefcase. "Marcus, Brenda. I would like to introduce you to my personal guest for the evening," I announced, projecting my voice clearly over their panicked breathing. "This is Special Agent Vance from the Securities and Exchange Commission. He has been investigating the fraudulent activities surrounding Zephyr Capital and Bradley." The SEC investigator stepped forward, pulling a federal badge from his breast pocket. "Dr. Eris," the investigator said, his voice like gravel. "Are you aware that attempting to fraudulently declare the chief executive officer of a multi-billion-dollar corporation mentally incompetent to seize control of her financial assets constitutes massive federal securities fraud? It carries a minimum sentence of 20 years in federal prison." The clipboard slipped right out of the fake doctor's hands, hitting the marble floor with a loud slap. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He looked at the federal agent, then at the heavily armed security team, and finally, at my father. The sheer terror of federal prison broke his loyalty in a fraction of a second. "It was him!" the fake doctor screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at Marcus. "I am not even a licensed psychiatrist. He paid me $50,000 in cash. He used the money he siphoned from Bradley's accounts. He told me to just sign the 5150 forms, and he would handle the rest. I had nothing to do with the corporate takeover." Brenda gasped, grabbing her chest as the hired gun flipped on them without a second thought. Marcus lunged forward, trying to grab the man by his tweed collar, but two of my security operatives slammed Marcus face first onto the marble floor, ending his pathetic reign of terror permanently, and guaranteeing that he would spend his golden years trapped behind cold steel bars. Marcus groaned against the cold marble floor as my security operatives held him firmly in place. Brenda shrieked, clutching her designer handbag like a shield, as Special Agent Vance calmly pulled out his phone to request local law enforcement backup. The fake doctor was already sobbing with his hands raised, begging for federal immunity. I stood over my father, watching his patriarchal arrogance evaporate into pathetic whimpers. For my entire life, he had demanded absolute submission, using his position as the head of a black household to drain my resources and crush my spirit. Now he was just a criminal pinned to the floor of his daughter's penthouse, waiting for a police escort. When the authorities arrived, they dragged Marcus and the fraudulent psychiatrist out of my building in handcuffs. Brenda and Chloe were forced to walk behind them, covering their faces in absolute humiliation as my security team escorted them to the service elevator. I did not say a single word as the steel doors closed on their faces. The very next morning, the financial guillotine finally dropped. The $10 million bridge loan that Bradley had fraudulently secured using my identity had fully defaulted. Since I had purchased the private lending firm that held the debt, I immediately executed the default clause to its maximum legal limit. The resulting financial shockwave was catastrophic for my parents. The bank instantly froze all of Marcus and Brenda's personal checking accounts, business accounts, and retirement funds. Because Marcus had foolishly leveraged the family mansion to the absolute hilt to maintain their fake upper-class lifestyle, the property went into immediate foreclosure. The bank dispatched foreclosure agents to the property, changing the locks and pasting bright neon eviction notices across the massive mahogany front doors. Chloe was completely stranded. Her 3 luxury cars had been repossessed and her credit cards were entirely frozen. Desperate to maintain her proximity to wealth, she managed to secure a cheap rental car and drove straight to the sprawling country estate of Bradley's wealthy white parents, the Vance family. She marched up to their iron gates, fully expecting her affluent in-laws to write a blank check and save her from the ghetto reality she despised. Instead, the heavy iron gates remained firmly shut. Bradley's father walked down the long driveway flanked by private security. He did not invite Chloe inside. He looked at her through the iron bars with unfiltered disgust. "You and your corrupt family have dragged the Vance name through the mud," his father spat, his voice dripping with elitist venom. "Bradley is no longer our son. We have officially cut him out of the family trust, and we are blocking your access to our properties. Do not ever show your face in our neighborhood again." He turned his back and walked away, leaving Chloe screaming and pounding her fists against the cold iron gates until her knuckles bled. With no money, no husband, and no elite in-laws to bail her out, Chloe drove back to my parents' foreclosed mansion. She found Brenda sitting on the concrete driveway, surrounded by a few trash bags, filled with whatever cheap clothing the bank agents allowed her to grab before locking the house. The grand illusion of their black excellence was reduced to garbage bags on the pavement. The stress of absolute poverty instantly shattered their toxic alliance. Chloe stepped out of her rental car, her face twisted with a level of pure hatred I had never seen before. She marched right up to Brenda and kicked one of the trash bags, spilling clothes across the concrete. "This is entirely your fault," Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You raised me to be a trophy wife. You told me I did not need an education because my beauty would secure a rich white man to elevate our status. You coddled me my entire life and pushed me to marry a racist fraud who stole everything." Brenda scrambled to her feet, her face flushing with indignant rage. "How dare you speak to your mother that way?" Brenda shrieked, stepping aggressively toward her golden child. "I sacrificed my life to give you pageant dresses and luxury cars. You were just too stupid to realize your husband was a broke criminal." The verbal argument turned physical in a fraction of a second. Chloe lunged forward, grabbing a fistful of Brenda's expensive hair extensions. Brenda screamed, clawing wildly at Chloe's face and ripping the designer sunglasses right off her head. The two women who had spent my entire life bonded together by their shared hatred of my independence were now rolling around on the hard concrete, scratching and punching each other like feral animals. Neighbors from the affluent subdivision stepped out of their million-dollar homes, holding up their cell phones to record the spectacular trashy downfall of the neighborhood matriarch and her perfect daughter. They blamed each other for the ruin, but neither of them realized the true devastation was still coming from inside a federal holding cell. Across the city, Bradley sat shivering in a cold, damp federal interrogation room. His wealthy parents had formally withdrawn his legal support, leaving him at the mercy of a severely underpaid public defender. The sheer terror of spending the next 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary completely broke his fragile corporate ego. He paced the small room, chewing his fingernails down to the quick. He knew Marcus and Brenda were trying to pin the entire financial fraud on him to save themselves. Bradley frantically banged his fist against the heavy steel door, demanding to speak directly to the lead FBI investigator. When the agent finally walked into the room, Bradley dropped to his knees, weeping uncontrollably. "I will tell you everything," Bradley begged, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I want a plea deal right now. If you guarantee a reduced federal sentence, I will hand over digital evidence proving Marcus committed tax evasion for 20 years. Bradley's pathetic surrender, inside that cold federal interrogation room, set the final gears of my retaliation into motion. He gladly traded my father's freedom for a reduced sentence ceiling. Marcus' fate before the morning sun even had a chance to rise over the Atlanta skyline. But before the federal agents could knock on the heavy mahogany doors of my parents' estate to execute the tax evasion warrants, the civil consequences of the defaulted $10 million loan arrived with absolute and terrifying authority. The bank was done waiting. Early the next morning, I sat in the spacious back seat of my armored Maybach, parked discreetly across the street from the sprawling mansion I grew up in. The heavy tinted windows shielded me from the outside world, allowing me to watch the spectacular finale of their fake aristocratic lifestyle in perfect silence. I sipped my black coffee as 3 marked county sheriff cruisers turned onto the pristine suburban street. Their red and blue light bars flashed aggressively, reflecting off the white columns of the estate. Wealthy neighbors stepped onto manicured lawns, eagerly holding their cell phones to witness the destruction of the arrogant family. 4 uniformed deputies stepped out of their cruisers carrying heavy metal clipboards and tactical flashlights. They pounded their heavy fists against the custom wood, demanding immediate entry. When Marcus finally opened the door, looking disheveled in his silk bathrobe, the lead deputy shoved the official foreclosure and eviction mandate directly into his chest. The bank had seized the property and the grace period was officially over. I watched through the tinted glass as absolute chaos erupted on the front porch. Brenda shoved Marcus aside, storming out the front door in her silk pajamas. She pointed manicured fingers at the deputies, demanding they leave her property immediately, screaming that her high society family was untouchable. The deputies remained completely unfazed by her pathetic, theatrical performance. They had a legal mandate to clear the premises and secure the asset for the bank. When Brenda physically blocked the doorway, one of the female deputies grabbed her by the arm and forcibly escorted her down the brick steps. Property handlers moved in right behind the sheriffs, dragging her prized possessions out of the house. Designer bags that cost more than a college tuition. The very same bags purchased using my stolen childhood medical settlement were tossed carelessly onto the damp grass. Brenda shrieked in horror, dropping to her knees on the lawn and scrambling to gather her expensive leather goods. She looked like a feral animal, hoarding scraps completely stripped of the elegant facade she had used to terrorize me my entire life. Marcus stood frozen on the porch, watching his entire identity crumble into dust. He looked around the neighborhood, seeing the disgusted and mocking faces of the elite peers he had spent decades trying to impress. His eyes darted wildly, searching for an exit, a loophole, or a savior. That was when his gaze landed on the sleek black Maybach idling across the street. He recognized the custom grille and the imposing security detail standing near the bumper. A sudden wave of desperate, animalistic panic washed over his face. He completely abandoned his sobbing wife on the lawn and sprinted across the wet asphalt. He slammed his open palms against the reinforced glass of my rear window, leaving greasy handprints on the dark tint. He did not look like a proud patriarch anymore. He looked like a broken beggar. When the window did not open immediately, Marcus collapsed, dropping to his bare knees right on the hard street. He pressed his face near the glass, screaming through the heavy insulation. Maya. Please, Marcus begged, his voice muffled, but dripping with intense toxic manipulation. You have to stop this right now. You have the power to call the bank and pay off this balance. I am your father, Maya. I gave you life. I put the very food in your mouth and the clothes on your back. When you were a child, you cannot do this to your own flesh and blood. You owe me your loyalty. You owe me your life. Save us. Maya, you have to save your family. He was deploying the ultimate weapon of toxic households. The heavy, suffocating burden of the black tax, mixed with extreme patriarchal guilt. He genuinely believed that biological obligation meant I had to endure his abuse, finance his crimes, and rescue him from his own spectacular failures, he thought. Demanding my submission as his daughter would force me to open my vault. I calmly placed my coffee cup into the holder. I pressed the silver button on the door panel. The tinted window rolled down with a smooth mechanical hum, exposing Marcus to the cold morning air. He looked up at me with wide, desperate eyes, expecting to see a broken daughter ready to write a check. Instead, he saw a billionaire who felt absolutely nothing for him. I reached into the leather folder resting on the seat beside me. I did not pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a single crisp piece of paper, displaying a certified laboratory header. I extended my arm and handed the document down to the man kneeling in the street. Marcus snatched the paper, his hands shaking violently as his eyes darted across the clinical text. He read the bold red letters at the bottom of the page, detailing a 0% probability of biological relation. His jaw went completely slack, his breathing stopping in his chest as the devastating reality shattered his final remaining illusion of control. Actually, Marcus, you are not, I said, my voice steady and cold, cutting through the noise of the sirens and Brenda's distant wailing. My investigative team pulled your medical records during our corporate background check. And since we share absolutely no blood, I owe you absolutely zero filial responsibility under the law. You are officially nothing to me now, so please kindly step away from my vehicle. Marcus stumbled backward as if the white paper burned his hands. He stared at the laboratory seal and the bold red letters confirming his absolute lack of biological connection to me. His jaw slackened, and the deep wrinkles around his eyes seemed to age him an entire decade in seconds. The paper fluttered from his trembling fingers, landing softly on the wet asphalt. He turned away from my armored Maybach and locked his sights on Brenda, who was sitting on the damp grass surrounded by her discarded designer bags. The transition from shock to pure rage was instantaneous. Marcus marched across the street, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned gray. He stomped directly onto the lawn, snatching the nearest luxury handbag from Brenda's grip and launching it across the yard. Brenda shrieked, covering her face as Marcus stood over her. A 0% probability. Brenda, he roared, his voice echoing down the street. I paid for her food and clothes. I carried a child that was never mine. Tell me what you did. Brenda curled into a pathetic ball on the grass, clutching her silk pajamas. The matriarch, who spent 32 years projecting an image of flawless superiority, was reduced to a sobbing mess. She could not maintain the lie any longer. The bank had taken her home, and the truth had taken her dignity. It was before we got married, Brenda wailed, her voice cracking under the weight of her deception. He was a wealthy investor, and he promised me a better life. When he left me and I found out I was pregnant, I had nowhere else to go. I needed you to provide for me. Marcus let out a guttural sound that was half scream and half sob. He kicked another one of her expensive bags, sending lipstick spilling onto the concrete. 35 years of marriage built on a disgusting lie, Marcus shouted, pacing frantically across the lawn. You let me raise another man's child. You made me look like a fool. We are finished, Brenda. I am filing for divorce immediately. I am disowning you and your daughter, too. Chloe, who had been standing frozen near the porch, suddenly snapped to life. Her eyes widened in panic as the last pillar of her financial survival crumbled. Dad, you cannot do this, Chloe shrieked, running toward Marcus with her hands outstretched. I am your real daughter. You cannot leave me on the street with her. Bradley stole everything from me. Marcus swatted Chloe's hands away with pure disgust. "Do not call me Dad," he spat venomously. "You are just as corrupt as your mother. You married a white criminal who ruined my name and destroyed my finances. You are both completely dead to me." Chloe stumbled backward, clutching her chest as she hyperventilated. Her husband was facing federal prison. Her elite in-laws had banished her. Her father had just disowned her, and her mother was a sobbing wreck. She had no money, no cars, and no home. Desperation is a powerful motivator. Chloe wiped her running mascara and turned her gaze back toward the street where my Maybach was idling. She sprinted across the asphalt, ignoring a passing truck. She threw herself at my vehicle, pressing her hands against the window. "Maya, please open the door," Chloe begged, her voice muffled by the armored glass. "Please, Maya, you have to help me. We grew up together." I pressed the silver button and lowered the window exactly 3 inches. Just enough to hear her groveling, but not enough to let her breathe the climate-controlled air inside my cabin. "We do not share any blood, Chloe," I replied, my tone perfectly flat. "And based on how you treated me, we never shared a sisterhood either. What do you want?" Chloe gripped the edge of the window frame, her fake eyelashes peeling off at the corners. "I will do anything," Maya, Chloe sobbed, wiping snot from her nose. "I will be your personal assistant. I will fetch your coffee. I will clean your office. Just please let me move into one of your penthouses. A luxury apartment is spare change to you. Do not let me sleep on the street, Maya. I am begging you." I looked at the woman who mocked my clothing, stolen my college fund, and intentionally spilled red wine on my custom gown just weeks ago. I leaned closer to the narrow opening in the window. "You did not want me at your Thanksgiving table, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "So you do not get a seat at mine." I rolled the window up seamlessly, cutting off her frantic screaming. Chloe slammed her fists against the glass, sobbing uncontrollably as she slid down the side of my vehicle and collapsed onto the street. Across the yard, the eviction deputies had grown tired of the family drama. They physically escorted Marcus and Brenda to the edge of the property line, locking the heavy iron gates behind them. My former family stood on the public sidewalk, entirely homeless and stripped of their false prestige. But the universe was not finished balancing the scales. The sound of heavy sirens echoed down the suburban street. 3 black SUVs with dark-tinted windows screeched to a halt right in front of the foreclosed mansion, boxing in my Maybach. Men wearing tactical vests with Marshall printed across the back piled out of the vehicles. They marched directly toward Marcus, who was still standing on the sidewalk trying to adjust his silk bathrobe. Marcus Hayes, the lead marshal, barked, gripping Marcus firmly by the shoulder. "Your son-in-law Bradley just finalized a federal plea deal. He handed over 2 decades worth of your encrypted financial ledgers. We have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest for tax evasion and corporate fraud." Marcus gasped, his face turning pale as the marshals slammed him against the brick pillar. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, echoing loudly over the sounds of Brenda's screaming. 6 months passed since the heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut around Marcus' wrists, leaving Brenda screaming on the foreclosed lawn. The cold, sterile, polished wood of the federal courtroom offered absolutely no comfort to the 2 men. Bradley and Marcus sat at the defense table in matching beige prison jumpsuits, stripped of their tailored suits and arrogant postures. They looked exactly like federal inmates awaiting a verdict. The gallery was packed with journalists eager to witness the final chapter of the Apex Transit family scandal. Brenda and Chloe were noticeably absent from the packed gallery, having slinked into absolute obscurity after the eviction. I sat patiently smoothing the pristine fabric of my charcoal power suit. When the bailiff called my name, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. I took the witness stand, swearing to tell the truth. The lead defense attorney, Harrison, approached the podium, adjusting his glasses with a predatory gleam in his eye. He was tasked with an impossible job, so he resorted to the oldest trick in the legal playbook. He attempted to weaponize my success, painting me as an angry black woman who destroyed men for sport. "Miss Hayes," Harrison began, his voice dripping with condescending theatricality. "Or should I say, Madam Chairman? You have built quite a reputation in the corporate sector for your ruthless hostility. You have executed 4 hostile takeovers, liquidating the assets of your competitors. You have a well-documented history of crushing anyone who stands in your way." Is it not true that you orchestrated this entire financial crisis to punish your family for perceived childhood slights? You bought your brother-in-law's debt and intentionally framed these innocent men to satisfy a personal vendetta. You set a trap and pushed them right into it. I looked at Harrison with complete indifference. I did not raise my voice. I leaned toward the microphone, my voice ringing crystal clear across the packed courtroom. I do not frame people, Mr. Harrison, I replied smoothly. I simply stop catching them when they jump. Your clients engaged in massive financial fraud long before I purchased their debt. My aggressive corporate strategy has absolutely nothing to do with their blatant criminality. Harrison scoffed, pacing in front of the jury box. That is a convenient narrative, he countered. But where is the proof that my clients acted with malicious intent? You claim they stole your identity and embezzled funds, but you are a billionaire with infinite resources. You could easily manipulate digital records to make it appear as though Bradley and Marcus committed these crimes. You spun a web of financial ruin because you were jealous of your sister's marriage and bitter about your father's traditional values. I did not offer an emotional defense of my womanhood or my character. I simply opened the thick leather binder resting on my lap. I brought receipts. I turned to the jury, making direct eye contact with the men and women who held my abuser's fate in their hands. Let us trace the money, I stated, firmly, pulling out the first certified bank document. On October 14th, Bradley Vance transferred $2 million from his logistics startup's payroll account into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Horizon Ventures. 2 days later, that exact same amount was wired to a luxury car dealership in Atlanta to purchase 3 vehicles registered to his wife, Chloe Vance. Harrison tried to object, but the judge immediately overruled him, instructing me to continue. I pulled out the next document. On November 2nd, Marcus Hayes signed a fraudulent proxy agreement using my Social Security number to secure a $10 million bridge loan. He then routed $50,000 of those illicit funds to a fraudulent medical practitioner to attempt an involuntary psychiatric hold on me, ensuring I could not contest the loan. I presented the signed affidavits, the routing numbers, the IP addresses, and the exact timestamps of every single illegal transaction. I systematically dismantled their entire fragile defense brick by concrete brick. I laid out a flawless chronological map of their greed, leaving absolutely no room for reasonable doubt. The jury followed every single word, taking meticulous notes as I exposed the raw mechanics of their financial crimes. Bradley sank lower in his hard chair, burying his wet face in his hands. Marcus stared at the defense table, his jaw clenched tight, knowing his patriarchal authority meant absolutely nothing in a federal court of law. Harrison was sweating now, his slick demeanor cracking under the weight of my undeniable evidence. He scrambled back to his podium, grasping at straws to save his sinking clients. You have presented a very impressive stack of paper, Miss Hayes, Harrison sneered, trying to regain his footing. But paperwork can be fabricated. Signatures can be forged by anyone. You have shown us a trail of money, but you have provided absolutely zero hard proof of criminal intent. You still cannot prove that Bradley Vance and Marcus Hayes knowingly and intentionally conspired to commit identity theft. For all we know, they believe that they had your verbal authorization to manage those family funds. Without concrete proof of intent, this entire case is nothing but hearsay and corporate retaliation. He smiled a smug, triumphant smile, believing he had finally found a loophole wide enough to squeeze his clients through. He thought I simply had no final strike. I returned his eager smile with a look of pure, cold, absolute finality. I reached into the hidden pocket of my blazer and pulled out a small, sleek silver flash drive. I held it up for the judge, perfectly catching the bright fluorescent courtroom lights. You are looking for hard proof of intent, Mr. Harrison, I asked, my voice echoing loudly in the silent room. I am so glad you brought that up. I would like to submit into evidence the dashcam audio from the armored Maybach that Bradley thought was being driven by a chauffeur. The judge signaled the court clerk to accept the silver flash drive from my outstretched hand. The entire courtroom held its collective breath as the clerk plugged the device into the central audio system. Harrison stood frozen at his podium, his face drained of all that manufactured corporate swagger. Bradley gripped the edges of the defense table, his knuckles turning completely white. He knew exactly which Maybach I was talking about. He remembered the ride he took from my headquarters back to his fraudulent startup on the day I officially exposed his embezzlement. He thought the silent driver up front was just another invisible servant. He was terribly wrong. A sharp click echoed through the overhead speakers, followed by the unmistakable hum of a luxury vehicle engine. Then Bradley's arrogant voice filled the cavernous courtroom. The audio captured him speaking on his cell phone immediately after fleeing my boardroom. "I need the bridge loan paperwork," rushed, Bradley ordered through the speakers, his tone frantic but chillingly calculated. "Yes, I know her signature is required. I already had Marcus sign the proxy documents this morning. The old man is so desperate to maintain his fake country club status that he literally handed me the pen. He actually believes he is the mastermind here. I told him he was acting as head of the household to protect family assets. He ate it up like a starving dog." Gasps erupted from the gallery. Marcus jolted in his seat, his eyes widening as he listened to his precious white son-in-law casually dismantle his entire patriarchal ego on a recorded line. But the recording was far from over. The voice on the phone asked a muffled question regarding the legal risks of identity theft. Bradley's cruel laughter bounced off the wood-paneled walls. "Are you kidding me?" Bradley scoffed over the feed. "Marcus is the perfect scapegoat. If the feds ever look into this $10 million loan, they will trace the initial proxy signature straight back to him. I layered the shell company accounts, so Marcus takes the primary hit. As for Maya, she will pay it off to avoid scandal. Black women are used to taking the fall anyway. They are conditioned to absorb our financial mistakes." The reaction in the courtroom was instant and visceral. The 12 men and women sitting in the jury box physically recoiled in absolute disgust. 2 black women on the jury crossed their arms, glaring daggers directly at Bradley. The sheer racist audacity of his statement stripped away every single ounce of his carefully constructed defense. He was not an innocent businessman who made a minor accounting error. He was a malicious, calculating predator who intentionally weaponized racial dynamics and toxic family loyalty to fund his mistress and luxury cars. He planned to ruin my life and send my father to federal prison without a second thought. Marcus sat completely paralyzed at the defense table. The devastating reality of the audio recording shattered his worldview into jagged pieces. For his entire life, Marcus worshipped at the altar of white proximity. He sold out his own black daughter, constantly degrading my achievements just to elevate this mediocre white man. He allowed Bradley to disrespect our household because he believed Bradley's presence somehow validated his own existence. Now he was sitting in a federal courtroom listening to that same man call him a stupid, starving dog and a convenient scapegoat. The ultimate betrayal broke something deep inside Marcus' mind. A guttural, animalistic roar ripped from Marcus' throat. He did not care about the judge or the armed guards standing at the perimeter. Marcus lunged across the wooden defense table, throwing his entire body weight directly at Bradley. He grabbed the lapels of Bradley's beige prison jumpsuit, tackling him violently to the floor. "You used me!" Marcus screamed, spit flying from his lips as he wrapped his hands around Bradley's throat. "I gave you everything. I threw away my own daughter for you, and you set me up to rot in a cage. You parasitic trash!" Bradley thrashed wildly, gasping for air and clawing at Marcus' face. The courtroom descended into absolute pandemonium. Harrison scrambled backward, crashing into his own podium to avoid the violent brawl. "Order in this court!" the judge bellowed, slamming her wooden gavel repeatedly against her desk. Bailiffs restrained the defendants immediately. Armed federal bailiffs rushed the defense table. They grabbed Marcus by his shoulders, prying his hands off Bradley's neck and tackling the older man hard against the carpeted floor. Marcus fought against their grip, screaming profanities at the son-in-law he once treated like a god. Bradley scrambled backward until his back hit the wooden railing, gasping for breath and clutching his bruised throat. The bailiffs yanked Marcus to his feet, forcefully restraining his arms behind his back and marching him toward the holding cell doors. Bradley was yanked up by another guard. his terrified eyes darting around the room as the reality of his situation set in. He had no allies left. His family abandoned him. His lawyer was speechless, and his co-defendant had just tried to kill him on the courtroom floor. I sat perfectly still in the witness chair, watching the spectacular implosion of the men who tried to destroy me. I simply closed my leather binder. The judge continued banging her gavel until the room finally fell back into a stunned, heavy silence. This behavior is a disgrace to the federal court. The jury has heard the evidence, and the audio recording speaks volumes regarding intent. We are moving straight to closing arguments, and then the jury will receive their instructions. The judge struck the sounding block one final time, dismissing me from the witness stand. I stepped down, walking confidently past the ruined defense table. I knew the trial was effectively over. The jury did not even need to deliberate for long. They were dismissed to their chambers, and they returned in under 2 hours. The heavy wooden doors of the jury room swung open exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes after they had closed. The 12 men and women filed back into their seats, their expressions completely unreadable. A suffocating tension clamped down on the federal courtroom. Bradley sat perfectly still, his manicured hands trembling violently on top of the defense table. Marcus refused to look up, staring blankly at the polished mahogany wood, as if hoping it would swallow him whole. The judge leaned forward, adjusting her reading glasses and addressing the jury box. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked, her voice cutting through the dead silence. The jury foreman, a tall black man who had maintained unwavering eye contact with me during my entire testimony, stood up holding a stack of papers. "We have your honor," he replied firmly. The court clerk retrieved the verdict forms and handed them to the judge. She reviewed them silently for a long moment before nodding and handing them back to the clerk to read into the official record. "On the first count of federal wire fraud, how do you find the defendant, Bradley Vance?" the clerk asked. The foreman did not hesitate. "Guilty." A sharp gasp erupted from the gallery. Bradley slumped forward in his chair, the remaining color draining rapidly from his face. "On the second count of aggravated identity theft, how do you find the defendant, Bradley Vance?" "Guilty." "On the first count of federal tax evasion and conspiracy to commit financial fraud, how do you find the defendant, Marcus Hayes?" "Guilty." The word echoed off the high ceiling, sealing the fate of the man who had demanded my absolute submission since birth. Count after count, charge after charge, the foreman delivered a flawless sweep of guilty verdicts. There were no loopholes left. There was no white privilege or patriarchal authority strong enough to shield them from the cold, hard consequences of their greed. The judge did not waste any time. Given the overwhelming evidence, the blatant lack of remorse, and the severe magnitude of the financial crimes committed, the judge announced she would proceed directly with sentencing. She looked down at Bradley with absolute contempt. "Bradley Vance, you orchestrated a malicious campaign of fraud, exploiting familial trust to fund an illicit lifestyle while attempting to destroy a legitimate enterprise. I sentence you to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole." Bradley let out a pathetic, whimpering sob, burying his face in his hands, as the reality of a decade and a half behind bars finally crushed his arrogant soul. The judge then turned her fierce gaze toward my father. "Marcus Hayes, you enabled this fraud and actively participated in the financial exploitation of your own daughter to maintain a fabricated social status. Your actions represent a gross violation of both the law and basic human decency. I sentence you to 10 years in federal prison." Marcus closed his eyes, letting his head fall backward. He did not cry. He just looked entirely defeated, stripped of the fake power he had wielded like a weapon his entire life. The heavy thud of the judge's gavel signaled the official end of their freedom. As the bailiffs moved in to escort the newly convicted felons away, a piercing shriek shattered the formal decorum of the courtroom. "No, you cannot take him!" Chloe screamed, launching herself from the wooden benches of the public gallery. She pushed past the swinging gate, her expensive high heels slipping on the carpet as she desperately tried to reach her convicted husband. "You are leaving me with nothing!" Chloe wailed, her voice cracking with pure hysterical panic. "The banks took the house. They took the cars. I have absolutely no money left. Bradley, how am I supposed to survive? What am I supposed to do?" Two armed court officers immediately intercepted her, grabbing her arms and physically restraining her from reaching the defense table. Chloe thrashed violently against their grip, sobbing uncontrollably. She turned her wild, desperate eyes toward me. "Maya, you have to fix this," Chloe begged loudly, abandoning all her previous hatred in the face of sudden poverty. "You are a billionaire. You can pay the restitution. You can hire better appeal lawyers. You are my sister, Maya. You cannot just let me starve on the street." I did not offer her a single word of comfort. I simply stood up from the plush leather chair in the front row. I calmly smoothed the impeccable fabric of my tailored designer suit, adjusting the cuffs with practiced precision. I picked up my leather briefcase, locking the metallic clasps with a sharp, satisfying click. I looked at the pathetic, sobbing woman being restrained by the court officers and felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no sorrow, no lingering obligation. My emotional detachment was my ultimate shield against the heavy toxicity they had tried to drown me in for over 3 decades. I turned my back on the screaming woman, the weeping white fraud, and the defeated patriarch. My elite private security team immediately formed a tight protective perimeter around me as I marched up the center aisle. I walked directly out of the double doors of the federal courtroom without casting a single backward glance. I left their chaotic, miserable ruin, trapped inside that room forever. The heavy acoustic doors sealed shut behind me, instantly cutting off the sounds of Chloe's desperate wailing. I walked through the quiet marble corridors of the federal building, feeling an incredible weight lift off my shoulders. The air felt cleaner, lighter. I pushed through the front revolving doors and stepped out onto the wide concrete steps of the courthouse. The bright afternoon sun washed over me, warming my skin after the freezing, sterile air of the courtroom. I paused at the top of the stairs, adjusting my sunglasses. Waiting for her on the courthouse steps is Brenda, looking aged, ragged, and holding a crumpled letter. Waiting for her on the courthouse steps was Brenda, looking aged, ragged, and holding a crumpled letter. The matriarch, who had once terrorized society with her designer handbags and arrogant sneers, was now completely unrecognizable. Her hair lacked its usual expensive salon blowout, hanging flat and dull around her hollow face. She wore a faded beige coat that looked like it had been pulled from a donation bin. The pristine image of upper-class superiority she had sacrificed her own daughter to maintain was entirely gone. When she saw me walking out of the heavy glass doors of the federal building, she did not hesitate. Brenda lunged forward, shoving her way past the scattered reporters and stepping directly into the path of my private security detail. My lead security officer immediately raised his arm, forming a rigid barrier between my body and the frantic woman charging toward us. "Maam, step back right now," the officer commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. Brenda ignored him completely. She threw herself onto the cold, hard concrete of the courthouse steps right at my feet. The sharp impact scuffed her bare knees, but she did not seem to care. She held up the crumpled piece of paper, her hands shaking violently. It was a final eviction notice from a cheap weekly motel. "Maya, my baby," Brenda wailed, her voice cracking with pure hysterical desperation. "Maya, please look at me. You are the only family I have left. Forgive me. I am begging you to forgive me. I am sick, Maya. I have absolutely nothing left in this world. My health is failing and I cannot afford my medication. Let me come home with you. I will do anything you want. I will clean your floors. I will cook your meals. Just please take your mother home." She reached out, trying to grab the hem of my tailored charcoal trousers, but my security detail swiftly blocked her hands. The reporters lingering near the courthouse columns immediately raised their cameras, capturing the spectacular humiliation of a woman who had once prided herself on flawless public decorum. She was intentionally creating a scene, hoping that my fear of public embarrassment would force me to open my doors to her. It was the exact same toxic manipulation she had used my entire life. She weaponized her maternal title, assuming my biological obligation would override my common sense. She thought my status as a successful Black woman meant I was culturally bound to carry her dead weight, regardless of the trauma she had inflicted upon me. I signaled my security team to stand down. I wanted to look her in the eye for this final interaction. I stepped closer to the trembling woman on the concrete. I looked down at the person who had abused me for 32 years. I saw the woman who had stolen my childhood medical settlement to buy beauty pageant dresses for Chloe. I saw the woman who had laughed along with a racist white son-in-law when he called me a burden. I saw the woman who had happily tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward just to steal my company. I did not scream at her. I did not shed a single tear or raise my voice in anger. The absolute lack of emotion in my chest was my ultimate shield. "You are not sick, Brenda," I said, my voice perfectly calm and entirely devoid of pity. "My private investigators ran a full background check on you last week when you started harassing my corporate office. You are in perfect physical health. The only thing you are suffering from is a severe lack of funds." Brenda gasped, clutching her chest, as her fabricated medical crisis was instantly dismantled. "Maya, please," she sobbed, attempting to force real tears from her dry eyes. "You cannot leave your own mother out here on the street. I made mistakes, but I loved you. I gave you life. We already proved in court that Marcus is not my biological father," I replied smoothly, adjusting the cuffs of my designer blazer. "And considering your extensive history of lying, I highly doubt you are the victim you claim to be. But even if you are the woman who birthed me, it changes absolutely nothing. You made your bed with Bradley and Chloe. You chose to protect a racist criminal, and you chose to abandon me. Now you get to sleep in the ashes of the fake empire you destroyed." I looked at the crumpled motel eviction notice trembling in her hand. "I suggest you go find a bus." "Brenda," I stated, my tone dripping with icy finality. "I hear public transport builds character." Brenda let out a guttural, devastating shriek, realizing her final manipulation tactic had failed completely. She threw her face into her hands, sobbing uncontrollably against the dirty concrete stairs. She realized she had officially lost her ultimate scapegoat. There would be no more handouts, no more stolen funds, and absolutely no redemption. I did not wait for her to catch her breath. I stepped gracefully around her sobbing form, leaving her completely behind. As I reached the bottom of the wide courthouse steps, a sleek vehicle arrived softly alongside. The rear door opened, and a tall, handsome man stepped out into the afternoon sun. He wore a tailored suit, but his warm, brilliant smile was what truly caught my attention. It was David, my fiancé. David was a brilliant and highly successful black architect. He had loved me long before he ever knew I was a billionaire. Seeing Brenda wailing on the stairs, David immediately recognized the emotional toll of the moment. He did not ask invasive questions or demand explanations. He simply walked up to me and wrapped his strong protective arms securely around my waist. He pulled me close, pressing a gentle kiss to my temple. "I have got you," David whispered, grounding me instantly. "Let us go back home safely." Exactly 1 year passed since that afternoon on the courthouse steps. The transition from chaotic survival to profound peace was something I had to consciously accept. I woke up in the master suite of my penthouse, the early morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. David was already awake, standing near the edge of the balcony with a mug of black coffee. We had married quietly in a private ceremony on a secluded island, surrounded only by people who genuinely valued our existence. There were no fake smiles, no performative family toasts, and absolutely no toxicity allowed. For the first time in my 33 years of life, my space was entirely my own. My phone no longer buzzed with manipulative guilt trips or demands for money. I had completely severed the rotting branches of my family tree, and the roots I planted with David were thriving in the clean soil. As I walked into the massive kitchen, I turned on the large flat-screen monitor mounted above the marble island. The morning financial news played softly in the background. The media had a relentless appetite for the spectacular downfall of the Hayes and Vance families forever. I poured myself a cup of tea, watching a viral video clip play across the screen. It was user-generated footage from a discount retail store in a rundown shopping mall. There, standing behind the cash register wearing a cheap polyester uniform, was Chloe. A group of teenagers recognized her from the highly publicized federal trial and immediately pulled out their phones to record. Chloe tried to hide her face behind a stack of clearance sweaters, but the teenagers were merciless. They loudly mocked her, asking if her white savior husband was enjoying his very terrible federal prison meals now. They taunted her about the 3 luxury cars she lost and the millions she helped steal. The video showed Chloe bursting into tears and fleeing into the employee break room, leaving the cash register completely unattended. She was trapped in the exact same cycle of poverty and public humiliation she had used to mock me. She had no country club memberships, no designer bags, and absolutely no escape from the digital mob that constantly reminded her of her spectacular ruin. The news anchor transitioned to a segment updating the public on the ongoing legal aftermath. B-roll footage showed everything perfectly. The footage showed the cramped, dreary exterior of a low-income housing complex on the outskirts of the city. That was where Brenda lived now. She was entirely alone in a tiny, run-down studio apartment that smelled of mildew and stale regret. Her wealthy socialite friends had abandoned her the second the bank seized her mansion. The women she used to drink expensive champagne with now crossed the street to avoid making eye contact with her. Brenda spent her days staring at peeling wallpaper, relying on public food assistance, and waiting for phone calls that would never come today. She had alienated the only daughter who could have provided for her, and now she was reaping the bitter harvest of her own cruelty. As for the men who thought they could outsmart the federal government, their reality was significantly bleaker. Bradley was currently rotting in a maximum security federal penitentiary in another state. Stripped of his tailored suits and his arrogant corporate privilege, he was just another inmate serving a 15-year sentence for massive financial fraud. He spent 23 hours a day, locked in a concrete cell far away from the luxurious penthouses and blonde mistresses daily. He used stolen funds to entertain those women, but now he had nothing. Marcus was confined to a different federal facility, serving his 10-year sentence. The patriarch who had demanded my absolute submission and wielded the black tax like a weapon was now answering to prison guards. His health was rapidly declining, and his bloated ego had been entirely crushed under the immense weight of the federal justice system. They were nothing but cautionary tales now. I muted the television and set my tea down. Dwelling on their misery was a waste of my very valuable time today, truly. I had an empire to run. I dressed in a striking tailored crimson suit and took my armored Maybach directly to the Apex Transit headquarters. The corporate energy in the building was electric. My executive team was waiting for me in the main boardroom, the same room where I had ruthlessly purged the rogue board members a year ago. Today, there was no hostility, only absolute reverence. I took my seat at the head of the long marble table. My chief operating officer projected the final contractual documents onto the main screen. We had spent the last 6 months negotiating. We had been aggressively cornering the market, and today was the execution date. I picked up my customized gold pen and signed the final acquisition papers. Apex Transit had just officially absorbed our largest legacy competitor, a massive logistics firm that had dominated the East Coast for decades. With a single stroke of my pen, I completely eliminated our biggest corporate rival and integrated their entire autonomous fleet into our network. The acquisition skyrocketed the total valuation of Apex Transit, pushing it past the $5 billion mark. I was officially the undisputed queen of the entire transportation sector today. The executives in the room erupted into thunderous applause. They celebrated the massive financial victory, but I raised my hand calling for immediate silence. I did not build this $5 billion entity simply to hoard wealth, like the greedy men rotting in federal prison. I stood up and addressed my executive team directly. Prepare the main atrium for a press conference, I commanded, my voice echoing off the glass walls. Instead of hoarding the wealth, I am hosting a massive press conference right now. Today, we are proudly announcing the official launch of the brand new Apex Foundation together. The press conference room erupted in a blinding flash of camera lenses and overlapping shouts from eager journalists. I stood at the podium beside my executive team, letting the magnitude of the moment wash over the room. I did not just announce a corporate charity initiative. I unveiled a fully funded $100 million commitment to build the Apex STEM Academy. This state-of-the-art institution was designed exclusively to provide full-ride scholarships, cutting-edge technology, and direct mentorship to young Black girls from underprivileged neighborhoods across the country. I wanted to find the girls who were told they were too loud, too ambitious, or too poor to succeed. I wanted to give them the exact same financial armor that I had to build for myself out of pure desperation. 6 weeks after that initial press conference, the massive steel and glass campus of the Apex STEM Academy was officially completed. The grand opening and ribbon-cutting ceremony took place on a bright, crisp Tuesday morning. I stood on the sprawling front steps of the academy, looking out at a sea of hundreds of young, black female students. They were wearing crisp navy blue uniforms, with the Apex emblem embroidered over their hearts. Their faces were glowing with absolute joy and unfiltered hope. They were entirely unaware of the bitter family betrayal and federal prison sentences that had indirectly paved the way for this moment. They only knew that a black woman who looked exactly like them had built an empire and decided to hold the door open for them to enter. David stood firmly by my right side, looking incredibly handsome in a tailored charcoal suit. His hand rested reassuringly on the small of my back, providing a constant, steady stream of unconditional support. He had designed the entire academy campus himself, pouring his brilliant architectural vision into every single classroom and laboratory. We built this sanctuary together. The local and national press corps were cordoned off behind velvet ropes at the bottom of the wide concrete steps. Microphones were shoved forward, and reporters were practically climbing over each other to get a soundbite from the elusive billionaire who had recently sent her own father and brother-in-law to federal prison. One particularly aggressive reporter from a major network managed to push his way to the front of the press pack. Maya the reporter shouted, projecting his voice over the cheering crowd of students and parents. You have completely revolutionized the transportation sector, and now you are making historic philanthropic moves. But the public still wants to know about the scandal. Considering your mother is currently living in poverty, and your sister was recently spotted working a minimum wage retail job, do you feel any guilt? Did the brutal betrayal by your own parents and your sister fuel your drive to build this massive $100 million academy just to spite them? The entire courtyard fell completely silent. The executives standing behind me tensed up, expecting a fiery defensive reaction. David simply squeezed my waist, reminding me of my untouchable power. I did not glare at the reporter. I did not show a single ounce of anger or residual trauma. I stepped up to the microphone stand, adjusting it smoothly with one hand. I looked directly into the heavy television camera lens, broadcasting my face to millions of homes across the country. I do not do anything out of spite. I replied, my voice perfectly composed and ringing with absolute clarity over the loudspeakers. Spite is a highly unproductive emotion, and I only invest in high-yield returns. My family taught me exactly what not to be. They worshipped proximity to whiteness and sacrificed their own blood for fake luxury and temporary social status. They chose greed over love. But I am not defined by their greed. I am defined by what I build. I built a multi-billion-dollar empire without their support, and now I am building a future for these brilliant young women, so they never have to rely on toxic people for their survival. My legacy is empowerment. Their legacy is a cautionary tale. The crowd of parents and community leaders erupted into deafening applause. The reporter lowered his microphone, completely satisfied and entirely silenced by my response. I turned away from the press line and accepted a pair of oversized golden scissors from the academy principal. David placed his hand over mine, wrapping his strong, warm fingers around my grip. Together we sliced through the thick red ribbon stretched across the main entrance. The heavy silk fell away, and a massive cheer echoed through the courtyard. Confetti cannons exploded, firing a shower of gold and crimson paper into the clear blue sky. I watched the hundreds of young students rush up the stairs and through the pristine glass doors of their new sanctuary. They were laughing and pointing at the robotics labs and engineering bays. I had successfully transformed my deepest childhood trauma into generational wealth and community empowerment. The cycle of abuse that Marcus and Brenda tried to trap me in was officially broken forever. I had won the ultimate victory. I handed the golden scissors back to the principal and gave David a knowing smile. "It is time to go," I whispered softly. He nodded, pressing a gentle kiss to my cheek. My elite personal security detail seamlessly formed a protective wedge around us, parting the crowd of lingering journalists and ecstatic parents. We walked away from the flashing cameras and cheering crowds, making our way around the massive academic building toward the sprawling green athletic field in the back. Waiting for us on the freshly painted private tarmac was Apex Chopper 1. The sleek black luxury helicopter gleamed under the bright morning sun, featuring my corporate logo painted boldly in silver across the tail. The pilot was already in the cockpit running through the pre-flight checks. As David and I approached the aircraft, the powerful twin engines roared to life. The massive rotor blades began to spin up, whipping the warm air into a fierce wind that tugged at the hem of my designer suit. My lead security officer pulled the heavy cabin door open and extended a hand to assist me. I climbed into the opulent leather interior of the chopper, taking my seat beside the man who loved me fiercely and authentically. I strapped on my safety harness and put on the noise-canceling headset. The pilot requested clearance from the local tower, and within seconds the heavy aircraft lifted smoothly off the concrete tarmac. I leaned against the reinforced glass window looking down as the STEM Academy grew smaller beneath us. We soared higher and higher, climbing above the sprawling urban landscape of the city that I now practically owned. I watched the crowded neighborhoods and the distant corporate skyscrapers fade into a beautiful distant tapestry. I was leaving the toxicity, the poverty, the betrayal, and the heavy burdens of my past permanently on the ground. Up here in the clear blue sky, there was absolutely nothing left but limitless power and perfect, unbreakable peace. The ultimate lesson from this journey is that biological ties do not guarantee genuine loyalty, respect, or love. For too long, toxic family dynamics, patriarchal guilt, and the heavy burden of the black tax are used as tools to manipulate and drain those who are quietly building their own futures. Maya teaches us that true empowerment comes from radically refusing to accept the role of the family scapegoat. When the people who are supposed to protect you choose greed, superficial status, and proximity to whiteness over your peace, the most profound revenge is never screaming or seeking their validation. The greatest revenge is total emotional detachment and spectacular, undeniable success. You are never defined by the deep insecurities of those who underestimate you. You are defined exclusively by what you have the absolute courage to build for yourself. Sometimes protecting your peace means permanently locking the door on the very people who share your last name, allowing yourself to finally soar. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace and build your empire? Please share your own personal experiences in the comments down below. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video.